All right, everyone, welcome back to the XHBK and Slusher podcast. That was our former placeholder name, except now we do have an actual name that we would like to announce on this episode.
Yeah, so we put some thoughts together, and we were thinking about how, like, the whole millennial versus boomer thing, and how it seems like the whole millennials going all the way back to 1980s feels like a really new phenomenon to me. Like,
Definitely.
I didn't consider it to be... I don't consider myself and someone born in 2000 to have anything in common at all.
Right.
So I just don't like that. And so it turns out there is a word for that.
Yep, and that is Xennial. So that's a new thing that's kind of bridging the gap between Generation X and the millennials, which I agree, it's weird to have myself now be considered, or was considered, part of the millennials when that name came from the new millennium. 1980 doesn't scream new millennium to me, so that's the limit that was originally put on it. So Xennial does fit. That's typically now 1977 to 1983.
Yeah, and what we were thinking about was that Xennial is like we wanted to bring into the podcast name something that represents how we are older gamers. And also, another thing about that Xennial time frame is, if you really think about it, people who game that are Xennials have been there from the beginning.
They've seen all the systems that ever existed, and really technology in general has grown through that generation.
So, yeah, like Nintendo's existed our entire lives. So unlike, for instance, someone born in like 1950 or something where, you know, they're probably still alive today, and, or there's a lot of them still alive today. And so they've seen everything that we've seen. But for us, it's a little bit different in that it's just been something that we've had in our lives the whole time.
Yeah.
And so we kind of wanted to tie in the fact that we're a little bit older gamers into the series name and why we think it's relevant. And at the same time, we didn't really feel comfortable using boomers.
Yeah.
It
it literally doesn't apply, but on top of that.
Yeah. It felt a little bit cheesy, but also inapplicable, and so we really resonate with the Xennial word.
Yeah.
And the way that we feel like it really describes us as being, you know, technically, yes, we are
as
millennials.
old as gaming, basically.
Yeah, but we were born right when gaming as it's known today was born.
Yeah. So our official podcast title is the Xennial Gamer League. XGL.
Also, you can just call it XGL. But yeah, so this is the Xennial Gamers League podcast, and this is episode 3 of the XGL podcast.
So with that, what we want to kind of cover in this podcast, a couple review things. So we're going to start off actually with talking about how we are going to review games during podcasts that you hear from us. We have a scale that we're going to talk about how we got to that and try to come together on that actually a little bit.
Yeah, right now we're close, but we're not quite there. But we thought that the discussion's worth having on the recording, and so we will be doing that. But also we wanted to talk about... there's one thing I wanted to mention up front, which is that neither of us are currently professional content producers. This is something we're doing as a hobby. And so for that reason, you're going to think that we're extremely positive because we don't get like download codes or review codes. The games that we get to play are the games that we decided to spend our hard-earned money on our real jobs to pay for. And so we're not going to be buying games that we're not already interested before getting them. And so yes, most reviews will be positive to very positive. And that's just the nature of we're only going to be reviewing games that we have to spend our own money on.
We should have the nice perspective of if we don't like a game, if a game's bad, we either just don't get it or don't play it. So you're not going to have to hear that. We don't also have to give that perspective because we're not a journalist.
Yeah, so I want to bring that out. So like I just didn't want to have people be like, well, you guys are so positive all the time. Do you guys dislike anything? And it's not like that. It's just like, you know, I can only buy so many games, and so if it's a game that looks like it's going to be bad, then I'm probably just not going to end up even trying it.
I'm sure you'll hear some negative. If a game exists that I buy and just turns out I misjudged it completely, we'll probably talk about it.
Oh, for sure.
We just won't focus on it because it's a waste of time to rag on something outside of just saying what's bad and moving on.
So with that out of the way, we're going to talk about our scale. So the first thing that should come up about this, and we talked about this a little bit in the intro video, is that both of us find the 10-point scale to be problematic.
Yeah. Or the, whatever it is, 100-point scale when you're using decimal points.
Yeah. So basically, I don't want to say it's 100% IGN's fault, but IGN is the biggest reviewer on the internet, and therefore it's kind of, personally, from my perspective, they've set the bar and everyone else is kind of falling in line.
Yeah.
So maybe it isn't 100% their fault, but it appears that way from the outside, which is that a review standard now has become 1 through 5 are basically all meaningless scores that mean terrible.
Yeah.
And the difference between a 1 and a 5 is non-existent. And then 5 to 7 is playable, but not something you spend your money on.
Not recommended.
Yeah. So it's they have a 10-point scale, but in reality, the details are irrelevant until you get to 7, because you just shouldn't be buying anything below that. And then from 7 to 10, then they also break that up into decimals because they've cut it down to 3 numbers. And
that really is adopted by pretty much everyone. The only variance you'll see is if it's a 5-point scale, it's the same thing, but then the half points make up the difference and they follow the same pattern.
So for that reason, we started with 2 foundations that we wanted to follow. The first one being, we want to use a 5-point scale. And then the second one being, we want to have it be integers only if possible.
Yeah, and I think we pretty unanimously agree on that. I have one exception that I'm proposing that I'm going to add, at least at this point, that Sasha may not. And that's, I'm down with the 1 through 5, no decimals, nothing like that. But I think I'm going to have points where I want perfection to me doesn't fit in a 1 through 5. And if there's a rare case where a game, for me personally especially, is perfection and then some, but I think maybe it's only perfection to me, I might want that to be an extension of the 5, so I'm going to call that something like an X5, which kind of fits because then it's maybe I'm saying, 2 5s or whatever the case is, it's my 10 basically.
So let's do this. Let's go through your numbers as is, and then we'll go through my numbers as is, and then we'll see if we can come to an agreement.
So I'm going to start from the bottom. 1 for me should be a short and sweet review. Hopefully you don't hear them off him. It's just a bad game all around. It's either not fun, has a lot of bugs, both, but they're not exclusive. They can just be one or the other and just be repeatedly poor performance. And that's it. Short and simple, not recommended, not a great game. Not a good game. 2 to me is actually, from 1 up, it's going to be more positive. 2 is a decent game, a solid game, but it has the occasional repeated issues. So if a game always freezes at one point, or it's something you have to deal with, it crashes a lot, or just part of the combat, for example, the same thing happens every time that causes an issue.
Do you have an example of something you might give it to? It doesn't have to be necessarily recent, because obviously...
Yeah, I'm trying to... Because I have an example in my head. I'm just trying to think of what game... this would be a bad example of it. I won't give the name of the game, but I'll say there was a game that, because of the way it's saved your resources, you had to delete them, or the game would freeze from RAM issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a chore to constantly go in and delete stuff instead of just going on with the game. You have to go in your inventory and clear it out, because if you weren't careful, or if you didn't pick up things off the ground, the game would eventually freeze because it hit its RAM limit.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it took away from the game because it was constantly pulling me out of the action and stuff like that.
I know what game you're talking about. I know you would give it higher than a 2.
Yeah, exactly. But that is kind of the example I'm going there. The reason I would say I'd give that one higher than a 2, that actual game, is because there's other things that counterbalance that for me to make it better. So, moving on, I'll reaffirm 2 if I have one that comes up, because I'm anticipating I won't have 1s and 2s often that we talk about.
No, probably not.
But, that's it. So 3 is just a pretty neutral overall good game. doesn't have those issues, like I said. May occasionally have one, but it's uncommon, and it doesn't seem like it's an issue with the game development. This would be at the point at 3 on, I would say I would recommend the game.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty simple there. A 4 is an expansion upon that, except it surpasses most categories. So it either does something new, or honestly, I'm very big on copying from success. So if a game copies 5 things from other games that are all good things, in my opinion, that should actually not be a detriment to the game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Do. And then 5 is a basically perfect game where you don't. So even in a 4, you might see a freeze occasionally, something like that. A 5, to me, you would never see any of those issues. You never see anything go wrong. Nothing feels rigid as far as mechanics. Everything, characters are fun to control. Loading times are non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 5 is basically perfect. But it's a score I'm going to give out. I didn't think I was going to talk about it like this, but if you think of like a job review, if you ever worked at a place that, whatever the numbers they have, the top score, sometimes you hear, well, we can't give out 5s because that's just not a realistic score. Well, then why do you have them? So my point is, I have 5 to be used. So that's why I say basically perfect. And that's why I want my X5, which is the we don't give those out kind of thing. So you might never hear me say one. I just want to have that there in case I feel like I need to really go the long way. That's like top 5 games of my lifetime would go into that.
Yeah, so you just don't want to feel like you're
I don't want to lump
prohibited
everything
on using level 5.
Right. 5 is, I'll basically be a 5 whore if I can be.
Sure, I can explain that. I mean, I understand you exactly because currently, well, let's do my list and then I can elaborate on that. So at the beginning, you're going to find a lot of agreement because we did kind of talk about this a little bit beforehand before we decided that it would be a more interesting conversation to have on the recording. So we kind of already came to a consensus on the first part, which is that talking about bad games is not that interesting. And also, if you're not recommending a game, or you're straight up saying this game is like not worth playing, worth the money, don't buy it, if you're advising against it, more or less, then those scores all kind of blend together. So it's kind of like how the 10-point scale thing, 1 through 5, are really all the same. So for that reason, the only number that I'm outright saying this is a bad game is 1. Everything else, including 2, I'm saying is, it's worth playing, kind of. I'll get into 2 right away to make that make sense, which is to say, 2 is, I personally enjoyed my time playing the game, but I don't necessarily think it's a good game, and I don't necessarily think other people would like it. It's sort of like a guilty pleasure, I guess would be a good way to describe it. Mm-hmm. So, while I liked it, I don't feel confident enough in that to recommend to someone else. And so, for that reason, it gets a 2. 3 is where I think the game is good, and I think it's like recommendable, like other people might like it. It's just like, so 2 is just like a solidly good game, whereas 2 is like, it's good, but I don't know if it's good to everyone or just me. 3 is like, most people, unless it's like specifically a genre they don't like, would consider this game to be good. Then 4 is like a very good game, like really good. And 5 is one of my favorite games of all time. So you can kind of see here where by labeling it this way, I've kind of gated 5, where I cannot use 5 the way it is right now. And the 5X thing does give you the opportunity to use 5 on a somewhat often basis. So I do like that about it, but I also feel like if you listen to the rest of my scale, everything else is just kind of moved down 1, where it's like 4 sort of sounds like your description of a 5, and 3 sort of sounds like your description of a 4. The difference would be like, I've kind of grouped 2 and 3 together, I think, from what you have.
I actually think the 2 is similar if you, Because a quick way to say it is 1 is bad game, 2 is good game but not recommended, 3 is good game recommended, 4 is great game recommended, 5 is almost perfect recommended.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts.
I think outside of the fact that I'll have the extra one, and that works both ways, because like you said, it's totally fine to not want. I just want to use 5s. I want to actually use them liberally if I can, but I also want a number that I don't use often, and that's why I have the X block, because I want that to be rare. We talked about this a while ago, where we were curious about, because we thought IGN's probably never given out that many 10s, and then we actually went down through the list, and I won't spend much time on this, but basically there's a lot more 10s than I would have ever thought there are.
Yeah, but that's like 20, over the course of 20 years, it was only like 30.
But still, that to me is, when you're calling something perfection, which is their definition of 10,
yes.
No flaws, I don't know that many exist. Like, that's a game a year.
Okay,
over 30
on
years.
my definition of 5, I think 30 would be reasonable if you were talking about the entire time that IGN has existed.
Right, but I'm just, if you think 30 years back, we're at 1990 basically.
Mm-hmm.
So say 40 years back, but even if there's 30, that's a game a year that's perfection, and I don't think, based on their scale or based on my X5 scale, I don't think there's 30 games or a game a year in every year of games. You know what I mean? I think there's a 5 every year.
I think about 1 a year is somewhat reasonable to me personally. That's kind of like how Rolling Stone used to treat their 5-star rating. I don't remember what their score system is. I think it's stars. I know the max score was like there'd be like 1 or 2 a year.
I guess maybe what I can say at least about me having kind of 2 5s is, if we get through this a year down the road with 50 games or whatever the case may be, it might be something that it gets trashed. You know, like, you know what, that's not working out. There's just going to be a 5. Whether it's for me, so I know that I might amend that and say, you know what, I've only given out 2 5s, so I guess there's no point in the other one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I think we'll experiment with the 5 for now.
Yeah.
Or with the 5X for now. I will adopt your system. So, 1, bad, but we don't need to elaborate on that. All bad games file under that same number. 2 is, I liked it, but I don't know if other people would like it.
Yeah.
3 is good / recommended. 4 is very good / recommended. And 5 is...
5 you can add to, I would say, you're foolish for not playing this game kind of a thing. You know what I mean?
5 would be foolish for not playing, or like one of the best games to come out this year.
Yeah. If you consider yourself someone that plays as many games as you can or loves video games, 5 should be something you can miss or you will not miss.
Okay, I can, and then 5X will be like candidate for top 10 favorite games of all time or top games of all time. Okay. Yeah. We will use that. I will say, as a caveat, my review in this episode was taking into consideration my old system.
Yeah.
But I'll touch on that when we give the actual score.
Do you want to add names? We're pretty much done talking about this, but do you want placeholder names for, like, 1's bad or not recommended, 2 is good, 3 is great, 4 is amazing, stuff like that? Do you think that's relevant?
I don't like those words, but I could see it.
Yeah, maybe that's something we'll add in later. I like the short descriptions that we have now better, but sometimes people like just a 1 word.
Well, I just like bad, okay, good, very good, incredible.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so that hopefully kind of gives you an idea of where we're at on reviews. Moving in, along with that, we're going to actually go right into the reviews now. So we have just 2 games right now that we actually want to talk about our reviews on that came out in the past 3 weeks, maybe now. Since you kind of had to adopt a semi-new scoring system, why don't you start?
Well, the first game we were going to review was Luigi's Mansion 3. This came out on Halloween, October 31st. I'll start by saying my expectation for this game, or like, you kind of like go in with expectations of like this game could fit in. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, before this game came out, I was thinking, this is a fun game that I want to play, but, you know, it's probably just going to be a 2 or a 3, just like kind of, you know, it's a game that's fun, but it's not going to be anything mind-blowing. It's just going to be a decent game. And I was really surprised by it, how good this game actually ended up being.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with the graphics are probably some of the best graphics on the Switch ever. I mean, which isn't saying... We can kind of look at it two ways. It's not saying a lot because the Switch doesn't have good graphics, but it is also saying a lot because it means the developer did a really good job of extracting power from the Switch.
Graphics, as an interjection here, graphics are going to be something that I am not biasing reviews on. So, like, for me, it's hard to say. Graphics are so good on so many systems now, it's hard to scale that, but I think it's better to maybe scale it within the system itself.
I think...
within
sure.
the qualifications.
I agree on the sense that I think that the minimum level of graphics is kind of like, unless there's like legitimate mistakes.
Yeah.
Like graphics are almost always going to meet my threshold of what I would say.
But that is a good point where they might get bad scores for graphics if they don't hit that minimum threshold of this expectation for the system.
But all 3 major systems have, like, they can meet my minimal graphic expectations. That it pretty much just has to be that, like, the artist is bad. Or like...
For me, it's like, I'm not going to nitpick 59 frames a second and 60 frames a second. It's the same thing with graphics. If we start getting with 4K now, I don't start nitpicking.
So when I comment on graphics, I guess it's more or less I'm commenting on the art direction. And in this game, I think the art direction is really great. I think that a lot of the bosses are, like, kind of cool ideas. I don't think this is too spoilery because it's only like the 2nd level. But for instance, there's like in the mall level, the final boss of that level is a mall cop, like a rent-a-cop, and his like animations and stuff like that are like really funny and like very. They did a good job of like taking the stereo rent-a-cop stereotype and making it into like a funny boss. And that's kind of what I'm saying when I think the graphics are really good. There's a lot of like really good like Luigi being scared animations, and
there's literally a button for him to be scared about the Mario.
And the way that like the ghosts react to Luigi and just stuff like that. When I say graphics, that's kind of the stuff I'm talking about, and I think it's all like really well done. I'm trying to think about how much I want to talk about here. I guess, you know, with this game, I don't think there's much of a spoiler situation, so I'm just gonna let it rip. If you're someone who doesn't like to hear anything about a game, you should probably not listen to my part of the review.
Well, and now that I'm thinking about this, as we talk about this, maybe we should bounce back and forth a little bit, and then I was thinking give your whole review, and then I get my whole review.
Oh no, I would like to bounce back.
Yeah, I don't think we should just skip the scores at the end, like cold turkey. But because that's what is huge for me is graphics, but also art design, is the fact is quickly into the game, so about the same spot, the 2nd floor of the security guard floor, the mall floor. I realized this is going to be really good because this means every level is going to have a different theme, which is something I love. Mm-hmm. That you won't see in open world games anymore, for the most part.
Yeah,
it's harder because you're in this one huge map, so you might see a cold area and a warm area and then in between. But this allowed you to go all over the place without even spoiling anything because every floor can be its own world, which that brings a real good classic feeling back to me, like Super Mario Brothers in general, but to a current, concept.
So I guess when I talk about spoilers is I kind of want to get into rating the themes, because I felt like there were some themes that were really well done and some themes that weren't as well done. And so the ones I wanted to shout out were the gym level. I didn't know that was in the game before I got it. Most of the levels, I will say, were in the trailers, so I knew most of the themes that existed. Mm-hmm. Like the E3 trailer had the desert area in it, and it also had the dance club area in it. But this one I didn't know existed, and yeah, there's like a lot of really cool things in there, like the whole mechanic with like having to turn the steam off of the showers, or like the dodgeball fight with the boss and everything like that. I really like that level a lot. The other level that I thought like really took advantage of the theme super well and was very cool was actually the Harry Potter level, which I didn't know that one existed either. And when I got to it, it wasn't like a theme that I instantly was like, this is a really cool idea for a theme.
Yeah.
But then like some of the stuff they did with it was like really cool.
Yeah, and on top, what I like with any kind of puzzle interaction is everything felt fresh. It's hard to. It's like they had the sweet number, and I don't know if I know the number, but like the exact number of puzzle solving abilities that you have versus like if there's too few, you're repeating the same thing. Nothing's really a puzzle because you figure it out so fast. This had just enough abilities where each floor was like, oh, I forgot about this move. This is actually like you can get stuck a few times before you realize, oh, I have this move. And it's good for the puzzle environment because sometimes there's enough moves where you're like, oh, it's got to be this one, and then you're wrong and stuff like that. I know. I really liked. It was you get stuck just long enough sometimes, but not frustrating amounts.
What would you say were your favorite themes?
I would say, well, themes versus length of the level. The themes, I really like the movie theater one or the film.
Oh yeah, that level is really cool, and the boss fight on that level is one of my favorites.
I'm trying to think of who I originally had told you my favorite bosses were because those levels. So because that's part of it. I like the pirate ship level a lot, but it's not long. But that's partially because I like the boss design and theme of that as well. I kind of like the pyramid one too because it felt very Indiana Jones like.
Yeah, the pyramid level was cool.
I like the fitness one, but I think you knew that already.
Yeah. Same
thing. I thought it was like, oh, it's kind of funny. It makes me feel like I'm going into a Bally's or something. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. LA Fitness. So I didn't think I disliked it, but I thought, this is gonna be whatever. But it made me laugh because it looked like I was literally going into a gym.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to be a really fun level, especially with the towels and the way the vacuum works. And
yeah.
So, I think that's probably. I'm not really answering based on my favorite themes because the dance club should have been my favorite theme.
Yeah, that one was in the E3 video, so I knew it existed. And that's like I would say probably my biggest disappointment. That and two things. One, the pirate level being so short was kind of disappointing, but the boss fight was extremely good, so I did enjoy it. But the dance floor actually was a miss on both.
Yeah.
The boss was pretty boring, and like the idea between like an 80s like themed dance level and then what it was, it's just like I just feel like they missed it. The
pirate level boss, my adrenaline was kind of going at a point where I actually had to be careful. Where the dance floor one, that's the way boring would describe it well. I didn't feel threatened the whole time. That also ties to the fact that I think the game did a great job of up until this point, not reusing boss strategies for how many floors there are and bosses. I felt like everything was pretty original outside of maybe a couple overlaps.
Well, there was one theme that is part of that boss that they reused actually 3 times.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like the 3-card Monty type of situation.
Yeah.
And the problem was the first time they did it, it was a literal 3-card Monty, and it was very cool.
Yeah.
And the second 2 times where they took that idea and kind of remixed it, it wasn't nearly as cool. And I think the problem with the dance floor one was that you could get close enough to multiple at the same time that you could trigger the reveal without the reorganizing by hitting like 4 at a time. And the one, instead of resetting because you hit one that wasn't the right one, as long as it's one of those 4, you would get to advance to the next part.
Well, that kind of goes back to my puzzle solving thing too, where it's like same thing for boss fights. It's like because that was a repeat, it was like, oh, I know what to do right away.
Yeah.
Versus the other ones, I had to kind of watch their pattern. Like, well, what are they actually vulnerable to at certain points?
That happened with me with the medieval stage, which was another really good stage.
I actually completely forgot about that.
But that boss took me a very long time to figure out how to damage them.
Yeah. Same. That was a big time examination in hard difficulty, like boss fight games, like Souls games or whatever. a person would teach you to just examine things, watch what's happening, so you can learn when you can actually attack. And
well,
that one I watched forever.
I feel like I can't really explain why without being more spoiler than I want to be. But basically, it's the end result is hard to find without taking risks.
I actually want to say, speaking of bosses now, I actually want to say something. This can continue the review too, but to a next topic. But the boiler room level, without spoiling the boss, I want to call this out because it's important to me. A lot of negativity is assigned to that floor.
Yes.
And because of the boss, and I don't see it. I can see maybe why they were having the issue, because we know that. But, so without spoiling the boss, a lot of problems are tied. People hate it because of the controls in the game. And if you haven't played around with the control settings by this point, you might have the same frustration. But one, I basically want to say I completely disagree. The level theme is boring to me as far as sewer, whatever. But the boss itself, I actually really like.
It's not that interesting. I don't hate it, but I do think that the idea of the way you have to have the one man on land and one man on water created some interesting puzzles.
Yeah, I actually thought that was one of the more interesting puzzle types. It's just the actual visual of the sewer
visual
is not
theme
super
is not that interesting.
But the puzzle, some people didn't like that either, where you basically had to, and it's again tied to the controls.
Yeah, so this is one place where I have to make a negative comment about this game, which is to say the default control scheme not being the optimal control scheme is unfortunate, because there is probably a lot of people who will play this game and never figure it out. Also, when EGAD tells you how to control things, he doesn't tell you about the shortcuts. So this is a dual stick control game. I want to put it that way. No matter what version of the controls you're using, you want to have full control of both thumbs on both analog sticks at all times, because the right one controls the vacuum and the left one controls Luigi's movement, and the boss fights would just be literally impossible if you aren't controlling the vacuum and his positioning at the same time. And so for that reason, you need to use everything in the game that you have to use, with the exception of talking to people, which isn't used in combat. It has a shortcut that uses the shoulder buttons. So you can very comfortably press all of your other buttons and use the shoulder buttons to control everything else. The problem that is here are twofold. The first problem being in the tutorial parts of the game. So someone who is not as savvy as me, I guess, that feels conceited, but I think that's the right phrase here, could go through the game, because even me, it took me getting annoyed with the controls to find this out. And who doesn't press start immediately and go in the control menu, they're not going to discover these two things. The first one is the tutorials tell you about the face button controls, which are completely useless. Using, as an example, the Y button to control the black light on the flashlight, or the A button to use the flashlight.
Is the best
flash
early example. Yeah.
Is it's beyond uncomfortable to use those.
So, think about this if you haven't played the game. A big part of the game is exploring the rooms and shining light or vacuum on certain areas of the room. So you have, it's not fixed. I guess it's kind of fixed camera, but you walk around the room with your left stick, north, west, east, south. You walk around the room with Luigi. If you want to look at a picture on the wall with your flashlight, you use the same thing to walk up to that wall, but you use your right stick to look up at the actual picture. If you want to shine a flashlight on it, you have to press the A button, which your thumb is already preoccupied aiming that flashlight or that visual at that picture.
Yeah.
If you use the trigger, you can vacuum easily, but to use that face button to use the flashlight, you now have to add an extra finger to the front of the controller that you don't have at the ready. So the game doesn't teach you that you can actually use the right bumper in place of the face button, which is the A button.
It would be one thing if this game had no in-game tutorial and just dropped you and was just learn how to play. But the game teaches you how to play using the face buttons, which is the wrong way to play. And so until you hit the start button and go into the controls menu to try to change buttons around to make it easier on your hands, so you're not like giving yourself arthritis in 10 minutes, all of a sudden when you open up that menu, you can see, oh wait, the R1 button does the same thing as the A button. I don't have to move it, I just don't have to use it. And so the end result is this: you can do everything without having to use any of the face buttons, and that actually is a great the controls are amazing once you know that, but the game doesn't tell you that unless you go into the control menu to try to make an attempt to change it. And then the second thing is the way that the right stick originally functions is actually not how you think it would. It is, as you hold to the right, Luigi slowly turns right. As you hold to the left, Luigi slowly turns left. And it's slow and has like a long, like turning 180 degrees facing one direction to the other direction takes like a full second. It's not fast.
Most people's brain, the way it works with dual stick type of controls, it will not feel right to you.
Right. And the optional setting, you can change it to the secondary setting, which is actually how most dual stick shooters work, which is where the direction that you're literally holding on the pad is the direction that he will face on the screen. So you can do a 180 turn instantly. If you're holding your right stick straight down on your controller and you hold it straight up, he will instantly turn from looking at you on the screen to looking away from you on the screen. And this, once you change the settings, once you learn by going to that menu that the shoulder button shortcuts exist, and you learn by going to that menu and setting the control stick to the secondary function, and so that it functions in that way, the controls are amazing. But I wish that those were the default controls, and also that when at the beginning of the game, when the character in the game is telling you how to do things, if they told you the shoulder buttons instead of the face buttons, I think it would make the game, like, you wouldn't have to be curious. There's probably some people who play this game who think the controls are terrible.
Well, and that's, I think, two things. I actually was frustrated with the controls and went into the options very early as well, but I didn't even myself learn that the shortcuts were there. I just found them by dumb luck. Each of them, actually. And then, basically, I found out the flashlight one exists, and then I was like, hopefully the other ones exist, and then
Well, I think we had the opposite experience. I went in because I wanted to remap the flashlight, and found that, and you went in and changed the way the right stick works.
Yeah, because for me, the first time I looked at something in the back wall of the room, and I looked up and realized now I have to take my finger off the thing while I've looked up and now press the flashlight.
Yeah,
that's not gonna fly for me.
So we talked about it either like a couple hours later that day or maybe the next day, and I was like, oh yeah, you can use the flashlight like this, and you were like, oh, that's cool, and then you said something about the stick, and I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And
so we both changed to one another's settings, and then from then on forward, it was like the controls are very good.
It's hard to explain the stick thing easily, but my way of saying it would be it's third person perspective. So like if you're walking from right to left and facing the left side of the screen, and something is alarming you or chasing you, for example, and you now want to move back from left to right while this thing's chasing you, but you want to shoot at this thing. You were pressing left, and now you don't want to go that way anymore, so you'd press right. Well, if you try to point the vacuum, now you're running away from it. If you want to vacuum while you're running, and press the right stick to the left, Luigi has to full turn around in slow motion, basically, while you're vacuuming. If you change this control setting, while you're running, you can immediately press left, and he's already facing that way, backpedaling. And that's really it. The only difference with this, I would recommend everybody do that control scheme. The only difference is you do have to use motion controls to look up and down, which is not the end of the world.
Is there any other topics that you wanted to cover on this game?
I don't think so.
The story is kind of like a non-existent,
We can say about how long it is, but we're going to talk about some of that stuff later. But it is probably about 15 hours to beat it all the way through without collecting everything. Well, I'm giving up. It's probably 12 for I think it was one.
Yeah, I think it's closer to 10.
But I'm trying to average out. Not everybody plays at the same speeds. I think you can get 50. Mine was like 12 maybe, but I tried to find some of the hidden items longer than you might if you're just trying to finish.
Yeah. I think I could have been more entertained trying to find more of the hidden items and definitely stretched it out.
Yeah.
But
But
it kind of has like an ending where it has no free roam, which is also something
well, and
that we'll talk about in our next part.
That is something to bring up for a review, though. I did not know this. I assumed that I beat it. I haven't gone back since I beat it. I assumed that I could go back in and it would put me back right before the end. And then I could go to the other floors and get all the hidden items and then beat it 100%.
Yes, you can do that, I think.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
I don't know for sure.
If it's literally like nope, you gotta start a new game, or...
I'm pretty sure it maintains the save before you beat the final boss. But once you beat the final boss, it doesn't give you like a new save where you can go around and look for the other...
Will it give you a different score than when you beat it each time? Like, based on what you get?
I think it would have to, but I don't know.
That's important, but if it doesn't, that's weird. But okay, so, scores?
Oh, I will say this, because I think I didn't touch on it, which is, when you were talking about the basement boss, I agree. I actually had heard that a lot of people found this boss to be hard and or hated this boss. And so I actually stocked up on 2 golden bones.
Yeah.
Which is like a revive mechanic. It basically makes it so that if you die to a boss, you get to... It's like a second life, but instantly. So if the boss has half life left, he still has half life left. Or if the boss is 1 hit from dying, he's still 1 hit from dying. But they cost... You have to buy them from this... with the gold that you collect in the game. The in-game currency, you can buy these. And so I actually bought 2 golden bones before the last boss because I was worried, but I wish I didn't. Because I actually died to the boss trying to figure out his pattern. And then once I died, I had already figured it out. And I maybe had gotten 1 hit on him, but I think I had 0 even. Mm-hmm. And I literally 100 to 0'd him without taking another hit after I revived. So the bone ended up being a waste of money because if I would have died for real and continued, I would have had the same thing as if I had gotten the bone.
I'm going to say one other thing because I know we keep talking about that boss, but the reason I actually wanted to bring it up is I used the control scheme I recommended to you.
Yes.
But actually for that level, without saying what you do, because of the system that you're using, I actually switched back to see if that was better in this scenario since you're not using up and down as much. So that level I actually completed in the other control scheme. So I don't see people's complaints about both versions should be fine. It's quicker definitely with the other one, and I could see that being easier, but it doesn't mean it was that hard with the other one.
See, I could see it being very hard with the default control scheme. That's what I would think. I haven't done it.
Yeah, no, I 100%. I actually almost got too comfortable to the old control scheme because I think I didn't switch it for the next level. You know?
Yeah.
I was pretty interchangeable, unfortunately, because of that. But because I had basically learned to play the game with the default for a couple levels, you know, and then I switched it. But then I backed and forth a lot because I was like, well, now I'm used to the other one. But that specific one, I was definitely on the old scheme, and I took damage, but I did not actually die to it.
I thought it was...
I lucked out. I almost died. But
once you figure out his pattern, I think it's extremely easy.
I did the same thing. Basically, I figured out just enough time to not die. And then you get hearts back. It seems random almost, but certain things will give you hearts back. Sometimes it does seem like, oh, he's about to die, let's give him a break.
Well, and you told me something that you did. Yeah, this is getting too much into this boss.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about.
But you told me like your strategy, and I was like, man, if I incorporated that into my strategy, he'd have been even easier.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's like I figured that out, and then I was like, that's why I 100 to 0 at that point. All right.
So scores.
Yeah.
So this kind of goes into me talking about how I didn't have your opening up of the 5 would maybe change my rating here. I don't know if it would for sure, but it would maybe change my rating here. I gave this game a 4. I think it's super good. It's way better than I thought it was even possible for a Luigi's Mansion game to be, because I thought that game would top out of the 3 if it was really well made. But I gave it a 4. I think it's super good. There are so many like memorable boss fights and levels. The replay, it's really fun. I don't know if I will replay it soon, but I feel like I was already thinking about when I beat it, like, this would be fun to play every October. Like, I probably will play it again next year. But probably not before then. I don't think the replayability is super high.
I think if there's nothing else out, I would have played it again, probably even right away.
Yeah, that is part of it too, is I just have like other games that I need to get through. But so I really liked it a lot. I don't consider it one of my favorite games of all time, so I shied away from giving it a 5. I do think it's one of the best games that came out this year.
Yeah.
But I still don't know, even if by your definition I would give it a 5. So I think I'm going to sit tight with a 4.
Alright, so you actually might think because I have 5 open that was in the strategy to give a game like this a 5, but it's actually not. And I didn't want to necessarily even open up with high scores for our first games, but it just turns out I'll say right away, I did also give it a 4.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, that's because 5, like I said, is kind of bridging the gap between a 4 and a perfection to me.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect game, and what I mean by that is that I didn't have any glitches, I didn't ever have it freeze, which you don't usually see with a Nintendo game.
Yeah.
But to me, the controls, not being able to remap them is something you should be able to do.
Yeah, there are changes that I would make even beyond what they did.
So, and this is why I didn't give it a 5. Because I thought about it. For the game that it's supposed to be, it's very close to a 5. But the lack of ability to remap, I don't want to take away from it not telling you, like we said earlier in the tutorial, even though...
Oh, I know.
That's not good.
I mean, I do think that's something they should tell you.
But I don't take away from my score with that, per se, because I don't really love tutorials.
Sure. I don't think it's the difference between a 4 and a 5, but I think it's something that they should have done.
But I do think some of the difference between a 4 and a 5 is the fact that you cannot change the controls. Let me preface this by saying when I first heard this comment, I heard that the game did not have inverted controls, and I was freaking out because that's like a standard now. It's been a standard for a long time. But like changing the camera to inverted or not inverted, because I'm an inverted player, I always have been. This game doesn't really fit that control scheme. Mm-hmm. Like, there's not really an inverted thing. Because it's not a shooter in that regard, because of the depth of the field of view. So that doesn't matter at all. Although, if it did, I don't know if they would have had inverted options selected, because you can't change any of the buttons. Period. And I would have added a few more options for the control scheme. Horizontal only is great, but I would have liked to see a little bit of a mix-up with that, as far as, like, maybe you don't lose the vertical, but instead the right stick doesn't look at the front or the back of the room anymore, and that's, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But in general, I think you just don't see that as much. So I gotta stop saying negative things about it, because that's just part of why I didn't give it a 5. We talked about the boss variety, the level variety. Everything controls really well once you kind of know what you're supposed to set it to, or know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. It feels very good to play. The vacuum is
the boss variety for me is kind of weird, because it's like there's probably there's probably like 10 like really cool bosses, but then there's probably like,
but even the ones that are
4
copies,
that are like
the ones that aren't copies, though, that's not a bad problem to have. They're not frustrating bosses, even the one that everybody, the go-to one that some people have. And the ones that are kind of meh it's just a boss. You beat it pretty easily, and that's about it. I'll also say the difficulty of the game is very good. Like, it's at a very good, it's not where I don't know if I ever actually died, but so that maybe that does, but I consider myself pretty decent at video games, so and let me say I did use my bone, so technically I would have died once, but I never got the game over tree, is what I'm trying to say. The difficulty, I think, is just difficult enough where I don't know, that's an important thing to me, because
it's difficult enough that you can't ignore the mechanics.
Right. With a puzzle-based game, there has to be some difficulty, otherwise you're losing a lot of the point of the game.
Yeah, you can't ignore like the boss mechanics. You have to respect their pattern, or you'll die. But if you know their pattern, you can kill them without getting hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm good here unless you have anything else you want to comment on.
It definitely fits what we described as a 4 to me, where it's above average game.
I think the only thing I
recommended.
I think the only thing I would say is it's kind of like the whole. I said like before this game came out, I thought I wanted it, but I also thought it was going to be a 3 at best. I think maybe this is like the scale of this game. It just, and by that I don't mean length. I just mean like the grandeur of what it is. It's just a puzzle game in a mansion with Luigi. Like, I don't even know if they could get a 5.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they've executed really very well, almost as good as they could have.
Yeah, that's more of a, do you give 5s based on the performance of the game expected within the game type versus overall bias? Yeah,
and I think it's the second one, because I don't know if I could give this game a 5.
Yeah. I would rather score it that way myself too, so as far as those rules. Alright, so our other game that we're going to review is mostly going to be my score, right? Based on
Yeah, I'm not going to be reviewing this game. What I will say, or I'm not going to be scoring this game. What I will say is that there's a term that we like to use called navigator.
Yeah.
Or co-pilot, which is like when you're playing a one-player game with someone else who's there as just like a second pair of eyes, like giving like, I guess like people who are used to modern times might like, it's kind of like how cringe has become like a little bit overpowered, where people are like, oh, that's cringy, and it's just like, you're just not even letting people be human beings at this point.
Well, to me, I would say it's what you might see on stuff like Twitch now is people would call it a backseat gamer. But it's not a backseat gamer because it's something that I want. Yeah,
it's like, well, and it's probably different when you have like a lot of people trying to navigate versus like someone who explicitly invited to your house to navigate.
With the goal, it enhances the experience almost every time. I can't think of a time when it.
But this is really good for games like, especially for like survival horror games. There's horror games because it takes a little bit of the horror pressure off, so it's a little bit easier
for both people. If someone there's cases where like I'm trying old school horror games, I would watch somebody else play, and it was like, it's scary, but I don't ever want. I think Condemned for Xbox 360 was like that at first. I did eventually beat that, but I watched somebody else do that first because it took the stress of actually having to hold the controller in that case to play it. Which I love the games like that, but sometimes it's too much. Where I just like don't.
Yeah, so it's just kind of like stress reduction / like, it's a way of hanging out with your friend or like playing with your friend that's really fun, and it might not seem like a legitimate 2-player experience, but I feel like it's a legitimate 2-player
Well, it's sharing the experience. There's so many times when I played single-player games by myself where it's like, that was so incredible the last 10 minutes based on, like, I got lucky with some combinations of stuff that I did versus the story versus what actually happened.
And that's definitely coming up in this conversation.
Yeah. Where, yes, that's so great for me, but you can never fully express that to somebody else unless they're there for this, and you can share that when this happens.
So I have never played this game, technically, but I did co-pilot this game that we're about to talk about for probably like somewhere between 10 and 15 hours. It was the first day that it came out.
The second time was it was a full day, basically.
Yeah, it was a full day plus the day that it came out from like, well, you know, it was technically a midnight release, so it was like from 9 o'clock until midnight.
And that worked out really well for me. So the game is Death Stranding. And the reason I'm saying that right now is that it worked out really well for me because the second day that you came up was perfect timing for as far as the development of the story and everything. You didn't miss a ton from the previous, like, skip day, basically. And again, with the co-pilot thing, I am like, I want you to be able to experience the whole thing, but it's a 40-hour
Yeah, so
game.
I saw Chapter 1 in its entirety.
And the beginning of 2.
I think some of 2, maybe all of 2.
Because we saw the name change.
And then I saw like chapters, I want to say like 4 through 7 the second day.
Yeah, those numbers I have no idea. You saw the good, like, whatever you want, meat and potatoes of the game though. That second day, I would call that probably the best.
And
if you're gonna watch that amount of time only out of the whole gameplay, that was probably the best chunk you could have seen.
So,
even though you missed the ending, but
sure. I will say this: I 100% am buying this game when it comes out on PC.
Yeah.
I don't own a PlayStation 4. That's the only reason why I don't have this game. We did talk about that in our intro, but in case you didn't know already, I don't have a PlayStation 4 just because it wasn't financially feasible for me to buy both systems when this generation started. I could afford it now, but it's kind of like I'm just going to wait for the PlayStation 5 to come out. There are definitely PlayStation 4 games that I would like to play that I'm definitely going to play once I have a PlayStation 5.
It's pretty much filled its role for me.
This one being would have been on the list, but because it's coming out on PC in the spring, and I don't want to wait that long to play it, I'll probably be buying it the day it comes out on PC, because I actually enjoyed every minute that I quote-unquote played this game. It was actually the first 3 hours, and we talked about this already, and I'm pretty sure you're going to go into it, but the first 3 hours of this game were some of the most fun I've had playing games all year long.
One thing I will say is, with this game, we might not have much time to talk about it, because do you want to... It's spoiler-ish heavy, so it's hard to talk about certain aspects of it, unless we want to.
I think for us, for our review to make sense, we have to talk about mechanics, but we can avoid talking about story.
Yeah. And I just think that'll help shorten up this time we spend on it.
Sure.
So, it's a Hideo Kojima game, obviously, if somebody doesn't somehow possibly know that. It starts off... The reason it was so fun at the beginning was you have to be able to laugh at some of the stuff that he does. And again, this was extremely enhanced with 2 people.
Yeah.
What you may or may not... What you wouldn't know about me is Metal Gear Solid 2 was such a cutscene heavy game. Well, his art in general. But my point I'm trying to make here is the beginning has some good cutscene length that I think you and I even took some joke bets on.
Yes.
As far as how long before we actually be able to move the character, which is okay. I don't want it to sound like a negative, but it was just we were able to have fun stuff like that. The game is different. So what you're probably going to hear, I guess I'll say it like this: what you've probably heard by now is it's a game where all you do is deliver boxes back and forth from a negative person. That's probably what you've heard, or a person who hasn't given it actual time. What I want to say about that is, if you are the kind of person that is obsessed with breaking down a game to that level, no matter what the game is, you could say most games are like that. And I don't know if I said this to you, but if someone, I shouldn't say you, because I hope that you like the game, but some of these reviews or quips that I've seen from people on social media saying it's a box delivery game, if you did that, those same people like games like, for me, what I didn't like about the newest Dragon Age, where there's 5 billion side quests, and it's, hey, bring this leaf over to this guy a mile away. Guess what? That's a package delivery game. Except you can't even see the package because it's in an invisible pouch. So if anything, this does that so much better. It creates some realness to it.
Well, what's funny is, like, when a lot of the negative, or not negative reviews, but like a lot of the, before it came out, people were like, we just can't, it's so hard to describe this, we just don't know what this game is, or like this and that. And I felt like, I think people were having a hard time.
I think they meant the story is what they should have said.
I think people were having a hard time describing the gameplay because of the graphics. And by that I mean, the graphics are too good for its own good.
Yeah.
Or like realistic. Here's what I'm getting at. The game to me has a really Harvest Moon / Animal Crossing type vibe. Especially the original Animal Crossing. And here's the thing about the original Animal Crossing. That game, the literal story in that game is buying a house and paying down the mortgage. That's actually the literal story of the game. Does that sound like a fun game? No. But it's done in a way where the game makes it entertaining. And actually, ironically, in that game, one of the absolute most common ways to make money is if you talk to the villagers, they'll ask you to bring something to one of the other villagers. Right. So that game is literally Death Stranding.
Well, and that's exactly what I mean, though, is like, if you're someone who, if you don't do that to yourself, is what I should say. Don't break a game down like that. Just enjoy the experience. I used to go on rants about that with like Marvel Heroes, for example. Like adding, well, all this guy does is he punches. All right, I can do that for any character that's currently playable or any wanted character. Mm-hmm. That's all. You can always do that. If it's zeros and ones, like
I just think, like, yes, is the gameplay portion of the game like 75% at least delivering packages? Yes, but it's done in a way where if you ask a follow-up question, is it fun? I would also say yes.
Right. Well, and the big thing is the game focuses, which is common theme with this game, it focuses on avoiding combat. Combat doesn't have to be in everything. It actually is in this game, and it's actually very good. Like, control-wise and fun-wise, it's very good. But I like the fact that it's not the opposite, which is most games nowadays, which is okay, but like 75% to 95% combat. Mm-hmm. Because it was infrequent or you would try to avoid it, it was actually more interesting to try when you actually did have to be in combat, because it was so rare. It's kind of like what I talked about, the puzzles and the abilities. When you don't have to use them all the time, it's a lot more fresh. And even though it's package delivering a lot, every game has point A and point B. Mm-hmm. So really what this game is yes, it's taking something, it's building up communities and stuff like Animal Crossing, helping your neighbor, but it's plotting charts, and the fun of it is getting from point A to point B and seeing what the improvements do, and just doing something because you enjoy it versus like, what upgrade am I going to get, or what? Yeah. There's no loot, and I like looting games, but there's none of that to worry about. I guess for the most part, I don't know if that's the right way of saying no loot, but there's no epic stuff like that, no drops.
Well, some of the delivery guys, like after you deliver something to someone, they'll reward you with like materials.
Yeah, but that's actually based on your reputation with them. Like if you hit a new level, so if not every time or not random deliveries.
I'm just saying you can get those, and those are valuable. But yeah.
So what I really want to get on track, I guess, is the game does. I think the best way to describe this is most people are good. I think anybody that plays this long enough, most people will actually like this game. What I think is going to be the case is and I think that point where people will start to like it is going to be for 90% of the people the same spot, which is the third chapter. And I'm saying that specifically so if you play this and you're feeling like, I want to put it down, get to the third chapter at least. But everybody is going to have possibly a different time when the game hits for them, where it's like, I really like this. For some people, it might be right off. Mine was very early. And I don't think it's too spoilery to know that you're helping, like you'll see, because I have to talk about this, what you'll see is other people's enhancements to the world.
Well, this is something I definitely think we need to
talk
about, because I don't think, I can't say why, like, without talking about this, why I like the game cannot be understood.
Right. So, without talking about any story, actually, if you got to go to point A to point B and there's obstacles along the way, your first time is how to figure out how to get there. But maybe someone else has already gone there, and they might have laid a ladder out that saves you a whole ton of, sidetracking type thing to get up there. That's where the game hit for me. The first time I went somewhere, I was like looking up at a mountain, and was like, oh my god, I don't even know how the hell I'm going to get up there. And then I started to make my way to a side, and I see a perfect ladder, and I thought, oh my god, this is actually awesome. I can just go right up this, save 10 minutes of time. Then it turned into, I want to do that for somebody else. And that's really where the game takes off, and that can happen in the very beginning of the game. It's just you get more access and you start seeing more of these things as you progress further through the game.
Okay, so I actually want to interject here, because there's one thing I wanted to get out of the way before we talked about this, which is to say, I said that the first 2 to 3 hours of this game were some of the most fun I've had playing all year. And if I'm being honest, it's not for the right reasons.
Yeah.
We were just having a blast, like just riffing on the game and like basically making fun of it. And
for the story stuff,
and
for like the weird stuff.
Yeah, making fun of like the whole, because there had been the controversy surrounding this game before it came out. Like, is this actually a game? Is it a movie?
Yeah.
is it even playable? So we were just kind of like telling jokes about that and just honestly having a great time about that. And so maybe the way to make this game fun for people for the first, instead of just giving the whole, you got to put in a good 15-20 hours before the game's actually fun, which unfortunately is somewhat partially true. But if you play the game with someone else, so you can enjoy each other's company and stuff like that for the first couple hours, at least for us, that bridged the gap to the point where once the gameplay became fun, then then the game could live on its own merits. That being said, then I missed the second day, and we played together for pretty much the whole day. The third day, I enjoyed the game for the game.
Right.
The game was...
And by the time you got here, I was like, wait till you get a load of this. Like, the game
was so much fun, and it was kind of like we were in the second part of what you said. So, when I got here, the game was, let's try to make... Basically, we set upon a mission of trying to make the game extremely easy for everyone. We're like, let's make it so easy to get from here to here and from here to here. So we set up like a transport system.
And I don't think that's bad to talk about those, honestly, because it's gated by the game and it's not spoilers. So what I will see, because in their own ads, it's the game, the core mechanic is reconnecting with people. So that's literally connecting large,
So if you think
space.
about it like if you think about the game kind of like an Ubisoft tower game, or like Breath of the Wild, how that had the towers that uncovered parts of the map. It's sort of like that, except for not really. So I'll explain. When you first get to a new area, it is you versus the elements. That's what's happening. And then you'll complete a delivery or a story mission to the central hub of the new area, which is the equivalent of the Ubisoft tower or the Breath of the Wild tower. And then when you...
If you appease them, sometimes it takes a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes they'll want you to perform some tasks for them to get it. But when they connect into the network, it opens up that area on your map, kind of like how it does in like one of those games.
So basically you can see the area on your map when you walk through it, but there's a separate network coverage thing. And that's mainly to help you know which is connected and which isn't later. Because you make a map yourself, but
once the area is connected, then not only are you connected to, like, not only does instead of like in those games where it just unveils the map for that area, it also connects you to all the other players.
And before you're connected, your ability to build items and structures that require power, which is 99% of the items, outside of what I first mentioned, ladders and ropes, and I think that's it. Everything requires power. You have to be connected. So, like you said, when you're against the elements because you have no power. You have to get up into the area. You can't see anybody else's things because you're not connected as well. You have a ladder and a rope, if you have that on you, to try and make your path easier, but you have to make the trek. Once you connect, it's like the lights are on. Now you can make that way back easier.
You can see what other people have put there for you.
All of a sudden you see everything.
And then you can also start building stuff for other people, like building roads and building other like tools for moving from point A to point B. And so basically, we were just going around, uncovering parts of the map, and then just filling them with transportation items, and creating, and so then
imagine that basically giving them a version of fast travel. Between the points.
And so then this game also has something in there which a lot of people who haven't really explored the game as much think is super cheesy, but this game has likes. And they are very literally like social media likes.
The easy way to say it is just on a simple ladder. If there's a ladder that saves me 10 minutes and I climb up it, as you're climbing up it, you can see the person's name or PSN name or whatever on the ladder. And at the bottom or the top, you can then press whatever that middle button is on the PlayStation controller over and over again to give them likes, but you have a certain time limit to do so. So, like, what I thought is, I climbed this ladder, this guy helped me out, I'll give him some likes, kind of a thing. There is an actual gameplay advantage to getting your likes up, but it became more about, like, this really helped me. I'm gonna, as you level up, you get more of a window to even give the likes, so it became about, I would spam 1,000 likes in 5 seconds because that saved me so much time.
And then in turn, like, it becomes, like, addictive to, like, farm likes.
Well, not even farm them. It was more. My thing was, man, I want to find the best location where I'm gonna get. I want a record-breaking amount of likes to be on a certain structure.
Yeah.
Because that was like a meta game as far as the shelter basically I had in one area.
Yeah, so we basically built a whole travel network for like almost the entire middle of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So you could get from this game takes place in the United States, but the map isn't quite the same shape. But it would be like
that, yeah.
It would be like if you could get from Washington D.C. to Colorado instantly by using our network that we built. And you could get to any point in between, north or south. We just made this huge network of travel stuff, and we were farming like tens of thousands of likes off of it because it was just making it so easy for other players.
And just some of the stuff is so fun because it seems obvious. Like, of course there should be a bridge here, but you have to have an item to craft a lot of these things. You have to have a specific thing that you brought with you, which takes up weight, which is your inventory, restriction. And that's what really makes it for me, because it's like, why wouldn't there be a bridge here? Well, maybe the person doesn't have it on there. So my example would be to get up into a mountainous area. My way to get there the first time, there's 3 bases basically that you pack on the way to get to the objective one. And when I got to the objective one, I thought, I am never going back that way again, because you don't have power, so I couldn't set up ways on the way in. And there was a specific part where I had a vehicle, and there is a stream or a river that you cannot pass in the vehicle, so I had to abandon it there and then trek the rest of the way on the foot to the last destination. And again, I thought, I am never doing that again. But when you were over watching, we actually did go back through that. I can't remember why, probably story related. And this time I brought along the equipment to set up stuff. And on the way back, I had told you, I bet you're going to see my vehicle abandoned here, because I left it here hours ago, gameplay-wise. And I thought, I think we didn't even do this right away. We went through, and on the way back,
there was a ton of
problems kind of happened.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've got one of these kits that builds a structure, one left, I'm going to make a bridge. And I made that bridge, and I'm like, I really should have done this sooner, because everybody that comes along is going to have this same struggle where they can't get across here, and you have
There was like 5 or 6 abandoned cars there.
Yeah, we saw more cars, everything like that, which is cool that you see that. So I made the bridge, and then I didn't come back there because I went up into my fancy way of getting around the map outside of that area. And the next morning I got on, and I had 25,000 likes.
On the bridge alone.
On the bridge alone. Because it was like, oh my, the feeling, it's hard to describe because you just have to play it, but the feeling of coming up to a bridge like that, I'm like, oh my god, thank god, because I would have been screwed. It's so cool. And then alternatively, the feeling of I want to do that is so cool, especially when you pull it off. And it's even fun to have, like, I put this bridge here, I thought I was going to get a whole bunch of likes and nobody gives a crap about it. Damn. Like, that's cool too, because it makes you think about, well, maybe that wasn't as good of an idea. The structure building is so cool in that game because you help each other out and because you have to put thought into it. So yeah, I don't know that we can really talk. The story is good, but we can't talk about that, or I don't want to talk about that at least. So I think we can just go right to scores, honestly, because I don't know really what else to say.
Well, it's just you for this one. I mean, I don't feel comfortable giving it a score since I didn't actually play it. I will say I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
From the time I spent playing it, I enjoyed every minute of it. I'm 100% getting it the day it comes out for PC. But having not currently played it myself, I can't really... Giving it a score would be unfair.
I can say this with the score, but one thing I will recommend, because we have a friend that struggled to get into the game a little bit because if you're the type of person... I'm the type of player that because of the way side quests have become in games, I don't do a lot of them. Because they're tacked on for time. Not in this game necessarily, but they are artificial time extenders for game time, So I am someone who gravitates, and right away, most games tell you which are main story quests. We have a friend that, instead of moving along the story, built up the initial area, I don't want to call it tutorial, but the first section, the east section of the map instead of the largest section of the map, before moving on to this chapter 3 that I'm talking about. And I would not recommend that in this case, because you can go back. I would not recommend that
basically he upgraded it with the lower tier, crappy upgrades.
You unlock, well, just in general, like maxing an area before moving on, I would not recommend until you get to until you get to chapter 3, basically. So for scores, I'm pretty unanimous. I've thought back and forth if I should take anything away from it, but I feel like that's appeasing something I don't have to appease. I would give it my 5. So not an X5, because it doesn't mean it's. I don't know if it's favorite game of all time material, but it's definitely a 5 to me because the game never froze. I don't have a PS4 Pro. I never had a crashing issue. I didn't have really any bugs, I don't think. Do you remember anything coming up? I don't remember a single flaw. So the game is extremely well made. The graphics are phenomenal, and I don't have a PS4 Pro, even though I have everything else to, like 4K TV, all that stuff, and it still looks really good. The voice acting and the cutscenes are phenomenal. There's a lot of famous voice actors making appearances, whether big or small, throughout it. It feels like everybody's in this game.
It doesn't struggle from the problem of real, like, television actors taking it not seriously.
Actually, back and forth. There's a lot of on-screen actors that are first time, I believe, to video games, you know? Like the main character, I believe this is technically, he was maybe in The Walking Dead. But I don't know if they actually used his voice or likeness necessarily. There was not that awkward, like, this isn't really your thing, it's very noticeable. And the same thing, the voice actors that had their likeness in there, would you say, I know he's in there, we can say that he's in there, but I don't know if Troy Baker is likeness-wise used.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I think this is his first appearance where he's, like, actually captured, and it's his
agility, basically, his face, and really good. Imagine if a voice actor's in a TV show, that transition doesn't always go over well, and he...
Yeah, everyone knows Troy Baker is a great voice actor, but I don't know if he's ever been the full-on body capture, played the character before.
Basically doing his own stunts.
And he's great.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know what else to there's not... I can't think of many negatives, if a negative at all. Outside, the only thing I can think of that's negative is you don't, the fact that it takes a little while to get going, so some people might not give it a chance. But that's not really a negative, you know what I mean? It's just, you might miss some people because of that.
Yeah,
I don't think it does anything poorly.
I think it's maybe a little bit on the long side, because I do feel bad telling someone, if you want to have fun, play for 10 hours. But I think the setup serves its purpose.
It did this for me, too. And this is...
It's kind of like, we talked about this with the Joker movie a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Where it's like, when you're watching the movie for the first time, the first hour is pretty boring. But the first hour is required for the last part to be good. And I think that's true here, where it sucks to tell someone that the first 10 hours are not that fun. I wouldn't describe them as boring, but I wouldn't describe them as being, like, nearly as fun as, like, Chapter 3 going on is. But at the same time, I think they set up Chapter 3 to be as fun as it is.
Yep, I agree. I do think that setup is required. It's I would say it's, if you cut straight through it, because duration is important to know, it's 40 hours minimum. Is that what... Mine was, I think, at 42 when I finished, and I feel like I did some side stuff, but I can't... So 40 hours average if you don't fully do everything that you can possibly do, max everything. Which is a good duration. I don't want every game to be that way for sure, but I haven't played a game that long in a little while now, so I like that. I was fortunate to have the weekend off too, so that might have been... Which brings me to my other point. This doesn't mean the game always gets a good review by me, but every day that I stopped playing, it was I just want to do one more. In this case, delivery, or just one more. Like, it's so close. I just...
Yeah, actually, that happened to me on the second day when we were playing. It was like, I should really go home after this part, and then it would be like, well, we could do, probably like one more delivery.
One more delivery is a good example, but for me it was like, one more like extension of the plot delivery. Where it's like, I just want to see what happens when I get to this destination. And that's a really good sign. Every single day, which brings me to my, this is not a negative on the game, but I don't think mentioning the length of the final cutscene type stuff is a bad thing to do as far as it's not a spoiler. This is important for everybody that plays the game and beats it. It's literally 2 hours at the end of the game, which I think is cool, but if you don't have the time to finish the game, be careful. Make sure it might have to be the beginning of the day. Maybe that's a negative, I guess you could take away. The reason it was rough for me is, and my point was, I had the weekend off and I worked on Monday. About when I needed to wrap it up within an hour on a Sunday night, I was beating the game. And I was like, I'm not going to bed. I'm finishing this. And I also had just heard that it was a 2-hour rumored cutscene. And it's not truly one long cutscene, but from basically finishing the last big thing you do to
basically
the game being over.
From the last time you could save and turn off the console safely.
Right. There's maybe a couple
the
opportunities in there, like one, but it was again, the savvy thing, not to sound arrogant, but I know how games work as far as like when it saves and when it doesn't, and especially when it comes to cutscenes. I was horrified to try and press pause. I don't want to skip a cutscene, and not be able to go back, or in between. Really, the one opportunity you had to move, I didn't know if you could save at that point. It didn't look like it was going to let me. So I grinded it out. And I was really tired the next day, but I wasn't mad at the game for that. It's just more, that's heads up for everybody. You need some time. But the story wraps itself up well. Kojima's confusing in a good way, and you're not going to know every detail at the end unless you somehow figured a way to learn that throughout the course, but you get the main things wrapped up perfectly. So, and controls, so that's it. Controls are perfect. Controls are, I said earlier, you should be fun to control the character. The only thing I could see some people saying, oh, it's not fun to lose your bounce. Well, that's a big part of the game. And as you learn to hold the triggers together, you really never have to do the balance mechanic at all. You just move slower. You can sprinkle that in, and it's the way it should be. So, yeah. Okay.
So then, actually going from a really long game,
right.
The other really topic that we want to talk about just quickly is, just as a final topic, there's a lot of, when reviews come up, a lot of talk about the $60 price point. Is this game worth it? Dollars per hour. I actually saw a complaint on Twitter about the length of the new Pokemon Sword and Shield game that just came out, where someone was like, if you just play the main story from start to finish, it only takes like 12 hours to beat. And it's like, well, or even shorter than that, but that's beside the point, because it's like, that's just not how Pokemon games are meant to be played. And so it's kind of like, it'd be like saying Breath of the Wild is a short game.
Yeah.
Because you can walk directly. You can walk directly to Ganon. The game does nothing to prevent you from that.
Outside of the plateau, you can go.
Yeah. So you can, without being a speedrunner, you can beat the game in less than 2 hours easily.
Well, easily is a strong word, but yeah, time-wise, you can.
The difficulty will be hard.
Yeah. Right.
But you can. It's not like you need to know like the frame perfect tree launch that's used in the world record speedrun to beat it in under 2 hours. You just have to be able to beat Ganon with 3 hearts, which would be hard, but it's possible. So saying like, oh, if you just if you don't stop to train Pokemon or like catch a variety of Pokemon, you're just trying to beat the game as fast as possible. It only takes this many hours. It's like basically the same thing. It's just not the way that is meant for that game to be played.
You and I both are similar on this, and for me, it's this attaching perceived value to hours of play is a mistake every single time. Your value should be determined from your enjoyment of the game. But a standard is becoming, well, $60 value is hours per dollar kind of a thing.
I think there's a lot of people on both sides of this topic. I definitely hear other people saying this, what we're saying right now. But for me, it's important to talk about it.
But how many games are there? Say there's a 5-hour game, but how many of this game was $60 and it was only 5 hours? How many of those games are games where they're like, I loved this game, and I'm more mad that it ended. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The complaint always seems to be the game's too short, but most of the games that are short that I love playing, I don't see that complaint happen with.
Well,
it's like they get a buy. You know what I mean?
There's 2 examples here from the last 6 months that are the main reason why I thought of adding this topic, which are Luigi's Mansion, which you talked about earlier. This game, if you really stretch it out, is 15 hours.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, that would be a 100% thing, it probably.
I guess my thing is when I play a game, so Luigi's Mansion, when it ended, I was like, all right, I'm okay with that, and I'm not upset that it's done. But like right now, I'm not reviewing it, obviously, because I'm not through with it, but I'm playing the new Jedi Fallen Order Star Wars game.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a moment last night where I was like, and I could go further in detail on why this is the case. I was like, I didn't read any reviews on it. And sometimes I use reviews to get an idea for timeline. And that's it, really. That's the only positive I get out of, like, big time reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, am I near the end of the game? And I wasn't, necessarily, but that kind of thing is kind of my benchmark for length. It's not about dollars per hour. It's, I don't want this game to end. I'm actually really having a lot of fun. Am I near the end? I hope it's not over soon.
Yeah.
Because that's not good.
I'll admit I had some negative thoughts with the other game I was going to mention, which was Link's Awakening. That game probably took me roughly like 6 hours to beat, maybe a little bit longer. I had never played the Game Boy original, and I mentioned this the last time we talked about this as well, which is that we have a mutual friend who had played the original, and so him knowing like where everything was, he beat the game in like, I think he said like 3 hours.
But I think we all agreed, I don't know, that the game is so good to exist.
Ultimately, I was happy that I bought it because I want games like that to be made. But I did feel somewhat guilty buying it with how little time I spent on it. I don't see myself playing it again soon, probably ever. And so...
You have a different perspective on that because I didn't buy it because of the duration, because I was someone who also didn't beat it, but I played the original a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was more the ability to play the game at the time. I didn't have it. It's almost as busy as it is right now, which is why I haven't finished it from borrowing it. But it was more delayed and for other reasons. I wouldn't have felt guilty, is what what I'm saying.
Well, what's funny is like when the dollar per hour thing first started becoming a big deal, back in the, I would say, generation with like GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox, was when people started talking about this for the first time.
Yeah.
And back then, 15 hours was a long game.
Yeah.
For instance,
40 was extremely long, and then 20 was like this is a good,
Well, as an example, Metal Gear Solid came out during the PlayStation 1 era, so I guess a little bit before that even. Or Metal Gear 2, but like Metal Gear 1, 2, and 3 are all less than 10 hours. 3 might be slightly longer, maybe, but that would be that would be considered a slow playthrough.
The main problem,
and those are all considered very good games.
My main argument that I mentioned earlier is that if you push down game developers' throats that you want hours of gameplay, you're getting 1,000 side quests that are meaningless. Not always, but that is going to be the trend, and it has been the trend. Sometimes it happens. Oh, here's your 40-hour game. The story is actually 12 hours, which is good, but there's 30 hours of side quests that are kind of like I said earlier. An invisible item goes somewhere and you just deliver it to a guy for some dialogue that has nothing to do with the actual story.
Yeah, and the worst is when then that gets baked into character strength.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like you have to do at least a decent amount of that stuff to be able to...
Witcher 3. Witcher 3 is honestly...
Yeah.
It's a good game, but it's a semi-casualty of that because you're not strong enough if you just play the main story, is my point. You have to go out and do the side quests.
Sure, but this actually kind of folds into my point that I was going to move to, which is... Witcher 3 has well-made side quests.
That's true.
Compared to a lot of games where like they are entertaining. Yes, they don't tie into they don't tie into the main story that much, or if at all. But they give the quest giver character and his own storyline that make it interesting to do. And so that's kind of why I wanted to move into like I actually watched a video. It was actually after I had written down that I wanted to talk about this. I watched a video by Triax where he was talking about the $60 price point, and I think he made a really good point, which is the real culprit here maybe isn't even the consumers focusing on dollars per hour, but the static $60 price point, where it's like the static $60 price point is probably the real issue, where if games feel like they have to charge $60, then that's Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze is a good example here. Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze was a game that was an extremely good game, but pretty short.
Yep. And another one that
on top of that, it was $50 brand new when it first came out on the Wii U, but then when it came out on the Switch, because the Switch was like the new hot console, it was $60.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, even though it's a game that's good enough, it's one of the better platformers made in the last 10 years, so it's totally worth getting. That whole increase of price after it'd been out for 2 years felt really bad.
How long did you recently played it?
I played it when it came out on the Switch.
How long did you? Because it's short. I mean, like, we're talking not 12 hours, like, short, like.
Yeah, I think it's probably only like, well, 4. It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
So your first playthrough takes longer, but if you knew what you were doing, you could probably beat it in like 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
But the game.
But I mean, then again, that's that way that kind of game is. The idea is you play it again and get all the other stuff.
Yeah.
But so that kind of goes against my side quest thing too, because that's not that style of game.
Well, I'll say in that game, it was like the difficulty was different in the sense that I felt like the difficulty for the stages that you could not beat on your first try, it was about memorizing the level. That made it easy. So that kind of adds game time, that style of difficulty where it's about memorizing the placement of things.
I think I like the static price point, even though it gets confusing when you have like indie games. There's some other games just in general that aren't necessarily always indie. They're like $20 or $40.
Sure.
Because it messes with that. That's what gets everybody thinking about this. But then to me, it's like a $60 game is not that expensive, and I'm not a rich person by any means. But I also hate hearing that line thrown out. I paid $60, and this game wasn't $100, and yet free to play exists.
It encourages filler, basically.
Right. Well, it encourages filler, and not that I want to derail on a free to play, but those are technically the most expensive games you could ever play,
without question.
And if $60 is such a discount compared to that I want more $60 games. If they have to be 10 hours sometimes, it's okay.
I guess I just mean like if to stretch out a game, I just feel like this probably wouldn't happen if you did it, but if you got rid of the $60 standard and made it so that like game developers felt comfortable to charge $70 if they were going to put the amount of effort into side quests that The Witcher 3 does. But then if they didn't feel like doing that, they could just like not have the side quests and charge $40.
Well,
that would be cool.
That's
that would not
our
happen.
DLC season pass world.
Yeah.
But I mean, even think about. I actually don't know the answer to this. Having games before the bump from 50 to 60, because they were always just 50. That was the standard. Were Nintendo games $50 always?
Well,
I don't know Nintendo as well, but I know Super Nintendo.
Actually, I remember this because of Final Fantasy, which is that those were based on cartridge size.
Okay.
Because cartridges, as everyone knows, cost way more than discs, but also they have variable costs between cartridge sizes. So, Final Fantasy 3 and Earthbound, famously, were very expensive because of this. I think Earthbound was like $100, and Final Fantasy was like $80. I remember my parents had this thing where like if I did this certain amount of work, that I could get one game.
Yeah.
And I remember Final Fantasy is not something I'm a bandwagon person on. I had the original Final Fantasy and it was new. So it wasn't like a thing where I did this on purpose. I just was a fan of Final Fantasy already at that point. So when I knew Final Fantasy 3 was coming out, I knew I wanted it. And so I did a bunch of bull stuff for my parents and got up to the one game thing.
Did you do some package deliveries,
Yes, I did some package deliveries. And so then when it came time to go to the store, my mom instantly honed in on the fact that Final Fantasy III was literally $20 more expensive than any other game there. And she was like, "Are you sure this is the one that you want?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's Final Fantasy, just like the other one that I have."
Yeah.
Of course, that means nothing
Yeah.
to my mom, but I was like, "I have all the other ones. It's not, you know." And she's like, "All right, well, if it's this one, then you're gonna have to get the 2 credits." So I didn't get it when it first came out. I had to wait until like 6 months later.
So you had to use a floating carrier in this.
Yeah.
Story.
But for that reason, I do remember that certain games, if they were bigger, costed even more than
Yeah.
$60 back
But
then.
was the average was probably still.
The
I just
average
feel like
was 50 back
was
then.
out. Which my point in even referencing back then is those games aren't long. Like
Yeah.
if you really go back and play Super Mario Brothers or any of those, they're very short. Not all of them, like because of the size of the cartridge, but they're also not 20 hours or 40 hours. So that's, to me, it's just always, that's just what games are. I again, we talked about this a little bit off recording, basically. To me, I don't break that down in the moment. I'm enjoying the game. I might think of it after the fact, sure.
Me personally, I kind of get bored with games after about 20 hours.
Oh yeah, well, it depends on the game. If Luigi's Mansion went another 10 hours, I would not have. I love the game, but if that went on another 10 hours, I'd probably have been like, just want to finish this. You know, like, I just want it done. That's maybe my own scheduling issue as far as having a timeline for when I want to finish certain games, but I didn't feel that way with Death Stranding, and that's funny. That's a long game, and I played through it all, and I was like,
I think for me, an example would be like Hollow Knight. That game, it's like a Metroidvania indie game, but it's like 50 hours to beat, and around like the 35-hour mark, I was just like, is this game almost over? I feel like I've been playing forever, and it feels weird to say that because the game is super good. Like, I recommend it highly.
yeah.
But I definitely got the vibe of like, I felt like I had done enough to beat the game, and it just wasn't happening.
Yeah. I can't think of an example right now, but I've definitely had that. Sometimes it's been games that I've played that you've also played or other friends have also played that I either am borrowing or want to play to say, oh, I finished it now. And I'm just like, I want it to be done, which is not a good sign for the game. Maybe it's not a very good game to me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Part of it too is, I originally wanted to talk about this as a topic, but in general, it's I think we can shorten it here to kind of wrap up, is the way those games are designed, and this maybe ties into the actual length of the game being announced. So if it's a 40-hour game, but that's not 40 hours of story, but maybe that's okay. So my example is Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably under 15, is my
Yeah,
guess.
it's probably under 10.
To beat it once.
Yeah.
But that's not really the point of the game, because that game, there's 3 other difficulties, and there's side stuff to do. My point is, though, I wouldn't let them say, well, this is a 45-hour game. I would disagree with that.
Yes.
It's a 15-hour game or less. But the design of the game isn't to play it once.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes it a little tricky. Another example would be Resident Evil 2. Just for me, that's easier to describe because it literally is made this way. Resident Evil 2, your games in general, your first playthrough is probably, I think mine was 8 to 10, maybe more hours. So that's even not that long if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But that game is designed, the speedrunners with that can get that down to under an hour, basically.
Yeah.
That game, those games in general get faster, and they encourage you to play through it again. This one specifically, because there's different perspectives, so they encourage you to play through it 4 different times.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I wouldn't say, if somebody's like, how long is Resident Evil 2? I wouldn't say the sum of all 4 playthroughs, because that's not really right to me.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't have to do that. That's just the ideal experience. That's the full story experience.
Yeah.
I would say the game's 12 hours. And,
Yeah.
And it's I want more games like that.
I agree here. The only thing I would say is, like, I agree. But for Marvel Heroes as an example, I think if you don't enjoy the replay in that game, like, for instance, the game probably takes less than 10 hours to beat the first time. But I personally would definitely... It has some endgame trappings that are similar to ARPG. It's not an ARPG, but it has... Like, you can replay it in this way on this hard difficulty to get items to make your characters more powerful. So there's that. But there's also just, like, well, I played through as the X-Men the first time. I would like to play through as the Avengers the second time. There's that. If both of those things don't sound interesting to you, I probably would not recommend this game.
What I like about replays is the forced structure behind it. And this is I was thinking we were not going to talk about this. I wanted to talk about free roam earlier because that's where the structure drops off after the game. So free roam should exist after you beat a game, but for me, I stopped playing and I immediately start a new game most of the time.
I think free roam is an important feature for people who want to 100% their platinum trophy.
Right, yeah, but that gameplay experience is not as fun to me.
Yeah, as a feature that you would describe as something to make the game fun, I would say in almost all cases it's not something that makes the game more fun.
That's exactly how I feel. And with a game like God of War or even the Souls games or anything, New Game Plus is the better route to go, especially if you can get that 100% through that pop.
Yeah.
But where you keep the things that you build, you don't start over. And like I could say about Marvel Ultimate Alliance, play it over again, and I really enjoyed that with the higher, especially the New Game Plus being a higher difficulty. So play it over again with higher difficulty, and do I watch the cutscenes each time? No, it's not the story that makes it more fun. It's just that it's forcing me to go through in a certain order again. Free roam open world is like, I need somebody to tell me where to go a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then again, I'm also the kind of person that's probably seen most of the game in that type of game. Because I explore.
Yeah, me too.
I don't like, even though I said I go through story stuff, if the game is designed right in this order, the story should progress you through most of the map. If it doesn't, why did you develop that big of a map that you're not utilizing it?
Well, it is definitely a real concern for some developers / games. But...
Yeah. But like Red Dead Redemption 2 is a good example. Death Stranding, so you have to. So I was a little bit more linear in Death Stranding. I didn't break off and do a lot of the side deliveries unless they were on my path. You know what I mean? Like unless it was the way I was going, I would be efficient. And Red Dead, I just pretty much played through the story and did some side things when I was in the area, explored new areas. But it does a good job of moving you throughout the entire map with that story. Even some of the areas where like, there's no way I'm gonna go here.
But I think that would be reflected in a review score. Because I mean, like, I think whether the map is just superfluously large or whether the game encourages you to explore or like via the main story pushes you to all the different areas at least once.
Yeah.
I think generally that happening increases your enjoyment of the game and will be reflected in the end score for that reason.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've said most of what I want to say for this topic, so unless you have anything else, I think I'm...
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up episode 3 of the XGL League podcast.
XGL, baby.
Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Let us know below if you like the new name, hate the new name. It's not changing regardless, so enjoy whatever you put. But we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.